Chalk, thank you very much for doing this, mate. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on, and I'm very I'm very happy that you agreed to do this, mate. Firstly, what's it like being back home? You've it feels like you've been all over the world to finally go back home. How was that for you getting the call? What's it like being back at the Reds?
Oh yeah, look, Duncan, thanks first for having me on, mate. Mate, real privilege to be on. I've watched a lot of over the last couple of years. It's been great to watch, and we'll chat about my time in Japan later on. But it's been great to watch, mate. I've sort of been a keen listener and watched for a long period of time. So thank you, mate. Mate, back at the Reds, childhood dream, mate. We're going to talk a little bit in depth a little bit later, but mate, I started work here in 2001 in community rugby. We started as a development officer, literally worked myself into the academy, and then 2023 into 23 coaching. Coming back in to be the assistant coach of the Reds, mate. What an incredibly excited. Something I've always wanted to do for a long period of time is coach my own home state. With that comes a lot of responsibility. So no, incredibly excited to be back, mate.
Mate, it's you've had a fair journey as someone that played for you briefly and then sort of followed your career from afar for a while. Can you maybe give a brief overview of your career up to this point, just so people can get an understanding of the journey you've been on?
Yeah, for sure, mate. Potentially journeyman might be I feel like when you're in something a little bit longer, that's what you get called. But certainly for me, Duncan, the fact is I've been a career coach. As I mentioned in 2001, it was my first ever job. So I've only ever worked in rugby. I've worked in community rugby, obviously, as I mentioned here at the Reds. Came in, worked in the academy. And then my first ever professional coaching job in 2006 was actually at Benetton. So I finished playing, and I wasn't a very good player, mate, but finished playing and headed to Benetton and worked as a skills coach and assisted over there with the Scrum program. And mate, again, just a great, at the age of 20, I think I was turning 25. My first, we had Italian, the front row we had there at Benetton at the time were, mate, they were 32, 33. They were the international front row for Argentina at the time. Did 2 years there, mate, and then actually came back and coached in club rugby. Came back to Brisbane full time. I did a year at University of Queensland and then 2 at Brothers, and was lucky enough to win a premiership there with Brothers, which is my own home club. At the same time, working at the Reds in the Queensland A program, so around the A program. Then I got my Japanese experience. So then from there, I've spent the last probably out of the last, since 2011, 9 out of the last 13 years, pretty much based, or 14 years based over in Japan. So that was my first stint. I did a 4-year period there at a couple of clubs up there, Cannon being one of them. And then came back to the Rebels, mate, where I met you for the first time. And then went back up to Japan, mate, coached at my old club. Post Rebels, then went to Samoa, coached the international team over there, high performance manager, and lived on island in Samoa. And then, mate, from there, went to Japan for the last 5 years and was lucky enough to be a part of the Tongan coaching group with Torai Kefu over the last 2 years and leading into the Rugby World Cup before coming back to the Reds, mate. Yeah, when you put it all together, it sounds like a long time. I sound old, probably look old, but I'm not that old, mate.
How old are you now? Because I think when I was at the Rebels, you were mid-30s.
Yeah, that's right. So just turning 42. Turned 42 last year, turning 43 this year. So as I mentioned, it's the only job I've ever had. And, it's funny, my family and friends still consider to ask, what are you going to do when you grow up, right? Like, that's the
Yeah.
same old story. But, mate, I couldn't ever foresee myself doing anything else. Absolutely love it. Totally enjoy what we're doing. Invested in the coaching practices of what we do.
I've a lot I want to talk to you about. There's obviously a lot of different ways we could go into, particularly off what you just said. But I want to go back to the first job at Treviso.
Yes.
How did that come about? I played briefly in Italy. It's quite confronting being in a country where you don't speak a word of the language apart from buongiorno. And how did you experience that? You were young, you were coaching international standard players, one of your first, major coaching jobs.
Yes.
What was that experience like, and how did that sort of come about?
Yeah, it's a great question, Duncan. I think certainly that experience shaped very much my future years to this point. Um, the greatest thing about working in a country, and as you know, having played in it, working in a country when you've got different languages and there's a language barrier, you're really either sinking or swimming, right? You can either accept that you don't understand the language and be battering your head the whole time and stick to your same processes, or you can be fully invested in how you go about it. One, learning the language. Two, simplifying what your own methods and the way you speak. And for me, it was very much about one, firstly, investing myself in the language, being able to speak to a point where I was able to coach in Italian within 3 to 4 months. And then that's very much shaped my whole concept moving into a couple of other countries I've worked in, both certainly in Japan. I put a lot of time into being able to speak the language and being able to coach and do meetings fully in Japanese. And that was really, really important to me around building respect from your playing group to understanding the culture. But I think the greatest thing in terms of the way that's shaped me as a coach is the ability to simplify things and explain things really well and understand probably what's not needed and what is needed and what gets the point across. The reality is it can be a very simple game. I think at times we probably make it a little bit tougher than it is.
I completely agree. Were there any mistakes that you made that stick out to you? Obviously, when you first start coaching, as
Yeah.
I've done in the last couple of years, countless mistakes that hopefully you learn from. Is there anything that stood out to you from that time that you're going, oh shit?
Yeah, great question again, because mate, I think I always reflect on this, certainly in my own coaching, because sometimes it comes back out. And I think that when you get yourself to a point when you've done it long enough, and by no means am I the finished product by any means, continually learning, forever learning in this game and how we can better do what we do. But the big thing for me is once I understood that I had very little control over really what the playing group did on the field on game day, the better I was. All it was about was, and I used to really ride the emotion of that around wins and losses. As soon as I understood that it was my job was about process, being able to assist the players to get better at the process and understand the training methodology around how they train better. Because ultimately, to play well, you got to train well. So as soon as I understood that I could have a greater impact there in helping them understand how to train well and push themselves in that space. And that really the process, if I get the process right, the outcome will look after itself. As soon as I understood that to that point, I think and I've really, honestly, Duncan, I think that's probably only the last few years that I've actually really, probably the last 3 to 4, when I was my last stint in Japan, I really got it. Other than that, I was riding the emotions of wins and losses and really took it on board and took it to heart when I read things in the media or, now it's right. It's all about process. And the other point that I think I've got to the point there is that our role as coaches is to protect the playing group, certainly as professional coaches. And the reality is coaches, when we lose games, we take responsibility. When we win, players take responsibility. I fully invested in that philosophy because the reality is they're only doing essentially what we're putting them in practice to do. So the losses are on us, and when they win, it's ultimately on them and how they perform.
Mate, when you're trying to work out the process that actually brings you success, and you've been doing this a long time, is it something that you constantly refine? So even though now you've been coaching a long time, you've had some success, coached at international level, you know what works, but is that process something that you are constantly looking at sharpening, refining, just getting better? Is that a daily thing, or is it something you look at every year, or how do you get better at that?
Totally a daily thing. I personally believe if you really want to get good at it, you need to, one, self-reflect. You need to, again, that whole plan, act, review cycle. We work in 7-day blocks, right? Based around, as you know, Are we, we plan, are we then in practice, what's our methodology look like? Daily, we're refining that, even to the point where, we can plan a week in advance and know what we're chasing. But if we're not refining it based on where the players are at, to how we feel like we're driving it, then we're really not learning. We're not listening to the playing group. That constant questioning of each other about how we're getting the information across. Did that work? Did that questioning work? Did we get the content in? I think it's a daily refinement. And certainly from a personal reflection, I definitely do it daily. And it's probably the greatest thing I'm really enjoying about the coaching group I'm currently in. Absolutely loving it under Les Kiss, obviously Brad Davis, Jonathan Fisher, myself, and Dale Robertson here at the Reds. It can be hardy, right? Like those conversations. And Les always talks about north. So, if we're always facing north and we're always pointing in one direction, we know it's it's coming from the right place. You can have those hard conversations and you can reflect and you can refine.
Mate, how do you look back on your first stint in Super Rugby at the Rebels? Obviously, you were relatively young for a professional coach. A significant amount of time has passed since then.
Yes.
How do you look back on it, and what are some of the learnings that you took from that experience that you maybe propelled you forward into future jobs and your second stint at Super Rugby?
Yeah, definitely. Can't be more grateful for the first stint, to be perfectly honest. Was a real coming of age for me. The previous 4 years, I've been lucky enough to be a head coach up in Japan at a really young age. So, I was 27, 28, 29 and came into Super at 30 as an assistant under Tony McGahn in the first stint, as you'd remember. What I learned from Tony, and was lucky enough to be taught by Tony actually as well at school. So what I really learned from Tony was around the process of coaching, how you go about putting the process together, how you go about refining your craft. And I can't be more grateful for him for that. My own learnings as a coach were definitely, probably, as I mentioned before, I rode the wins and losses pretty hard. Maybe read a little bit too much into when we were doing really well. In our first year in 2016 at the Rebels, we beat all the Kiwi teams. Like my first game in Super was, in Christchurch at AMI Stadium. You beat Canterbury round 1, right? And I'm going, how easy is Super Rugby? Like everyone talks about how hard it is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is easy stuff, right? And then, we go on to beat all the Kiwi teams, nearly miss out in the finals. But then from the following 2 years, it became a real struggle because that was the period where Aussie teams just didn't beat Kiwi teams. They went on this real flush run around how we were. And I got really challenged myself as an individual around how I could develop my game and how develop the game with the players that I was working underneath. And to be fair, I probably didn't lean on them enough. I felt like I had to shoulder that burden the whole way. But post that, I feel like the greatest learning I've taken, and certainly being able to coach internationally, one at Samoa and two at Tonga, is that the players really have all the IP and you've got some great people come in and at all levels, and that IQ is within the playing group. You don't have to have all the answers.
Mate, that's such a great reflection. How long did it take you to come up with that? Is it something that you saw at the time? Is it something that you've seen with the benefit of hindsight as more, as time passes, we all learn and we look at things differently? Was it something that took you a little while to come to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you think about that, like that was, me going to Samoa, my first tour. I lost my job at the Rebels while the team had been bought out by Rugby Australia and Western Force guys came in. So that was a real shock for me, right? Like I'm thinking, sweet, here we go. I'm in Super and right, all things lead to wherever they go to, and then all of a sudden you don't have a job. So there was a lot of reflection in that period, and I was lucky enough within a couple of weeks to be going on tour. We with Samoa, and we played Scotland, England, and Romania in that period, and it was a real reflection just with that playing group. One, being able to connect with them, get to know them, And through that period of getting to know those players and understanding, international level players, you got some Chris Vuis of the world, you've got some, Vunapolas of the world that really are world class players, and being able to talk with them about different ways to do things really opened my eyes. And I can't be more grateful for that experience.
What's the difference between Test and Super Rugby level, or Test and say Japanese top league? The two tiers of that level of rugby. What's the difference in coaching at the Test level?
Yeah, time. A great example for that. This previous World Cup cycle where we're leading into the World Cup with Tonga, we had literally 5 days to prepare it for a test match leading into Play Australia A, and we're lucky enough to win that game. You honestly get 3 sessions essentially to put a team together to be able to go out and play against some of the best teams in the world. You're really looking at the critical factors around what make teams tick and what helps you do well. You look at a preseason where Japanese preseason can be anywhere, mate, can be 14 weeks. Sometimes it can be 5 months, the Japanese preseason, right? So you got time to build your game and build really, chronologically as you go. But in test match rugby, the expectation is, what are the big rocks? What really matters? And how do we go about driving the really important things that make us go well? And so, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so I was going to say, so obviously, 3 sessions preparing for a test match. Obviously, you've got some physical limitations on the athletes. You can't really flog them in a test week, or you shouldn't. Is there much coaching that's done away from the field as well? So prior to when you actually get the group together, will they have an idea of what you want to achieve for scrum, line out plan, defensive setups? Is that all done prior to getting in there, or do you try and do as much coaching away from the field as you can?
Yeah, it's a great bit of advice, mate, because really for any coach, you look at the time you've got on the field and you are really limited. We had a group of coaches in here yesterday from Clubland, and essentially we only really have one more session than they do a week. The reality is, however, where we're lucky is we've got time in and around gym sessions to be able to do walkthroughs, Tai Chi's, be able to understand, how we're going to implement our systems. Obviously, in a test week, the importance is about the framework they come in at. You can be talking all you like on WhatsApps and, on huddles and this type of things. But the reality is a lot of those boys are in season. So a lot of those boys are already thinking about their own calls, the way they do things. The reality is we just had to narrow our focus and then utilize as much time off the field in and around gym sessions, how you go about walkthroughs, and rely on the connection piece and understand the really simple principles, and then allow them to play.
Yeah. What do you find more satisfying, just out of interest? Obviously, when you're at the Reds, and it's probably a weird question, but
Yeah.
do you enjoy having that day in, day out chance to really develop the people and get to know them and build relationships, versus a test match, which I could imagine is really exciting, but only a short window of time to actually develop people as players, and maybe not even a chance to develop them as players, just get everyone on the same page.
Yeah, mate, I love it all, to be perfectly honest with you. I just love it all, mate. I honestly love coming to work every day. It's the greatest job on earth, right? Like, it actually doesn't bother me. I could be, with my son's under 10s, is my youngest son, my daughter playing touch. I just genuinely love the process of coaching. And I really enjoy connecting with players and playing group. The other part is, mate, I really enjoy writing. There's nothing better than being in a winning change room from a rugby sense, right? Yeah. There's nothing better than that sheer exhilaration. And I can guarantee you that a winning change room in a test match, and a winning change room at the end of a grand final when you've won, in a clubland, winning grand final at the end of, a season in Japan, we've been successful and been promoted. They're all the same. That feeling, that 2 or 3 hours after, there's no other better feeling. And that from your time of being successful.
It's the best beer. It's the best beer there is.
The best beer there is, mate. Yeah. And the greatest relief at the same time.
Mate, what was your time in Japan like? I've heard nearly every coach I've ever spoken to says Japan was pivotal for their development in terms of similar to your Italy experience, simplifying, learning a language, and focusing on what really matters. But I've heard just as many people have horror stories about Japan. What was your experience? What were your experiences like? What stuck out to you,
Yeah,
if anything?
I love Japanese rugby. I'm not going to lie. Hence, I spent nearly 9 years there. So, um, I was lucky enough to be able to pick up the language well, so I could build a really good connection with the playing group and staff. You're 100% right. The time that you get to coach is incredible. Like if you want to learn and you want to go and coach, this is what I always say to guys that go, oh, how do I get better as a coach? You got to coach. You got to coach all the areas. You got to go and try things and throw it out there and have a crack. And with the nature of the way the seasons have been over the last sort of 15, is because I've done Japan in two different stints, one of four or one of five and one of four. So the way in which you get to do that is that you get a long period of time to either is to be able to build a team, and it's certainly for me over the last couple of years we had some real budget constraints at the club I was at, so
Yeah.
I was lucky enough to coach all the areas for the first 3 years of my last stint. So I literally was the only coach, and I had one assistant who helped with a bit of catch pass as a skills coach. So mate, I'm doing running from back session to forward sessions, and how, and head coaching the whole program. And you having to almost be a chameleon, right? Like, backs are very different to forwards, mate. I can tell you, like I can bring an intent around how I do things at forwards, and that necessarily doesn't translate in backs, right? They're a little bit more
Yeah.
cool, calm, and collected, those blokes. But I learn a lot about them, right? I learn a lot about how understanding their connections and what their needs were for me when I've now come back into being a forwards coach. It was great because it was how that I could connect what I've been doing now in the forward setting to what they need. If anyone ever gets the opportunity to go up to Japan, I would 100% advise it. And a couple of reasons, as I mentioned, one, the opportunity to do a lot of coaching. Two, you've got to simplify your message. Three, the culture is amazing. The culture is incredible. The people are beautiful. And anyone who's been up there, there's obviously been a lot of Aussies over there over the winter, up there just over the Christmas holidays. But obviously, it's fantastic. And the thing about the standard of rugby, there's 23 professional rugby teams up there now across 3 different divisions. So the reality of that is there's a lot of foreign players up there over the last 25 to 30 years that have not only added to that mystique around development of Japanese rugby. Japanese rugby has its own style. There's some great Japanese rugby coaches. There's some great Japanese rugby players understand the game well, and you've only seen that through the national program and their success over the last, 2 Rugby World Cup cycles. They're a force, and it's a great competition.
Mate, I got to ask you some forwards coaching questions,
Okay.
selfishly for my own benefit, but you'd be blown away how popular the scrum coaching podcasts actually are.
Brilliant.
Maybe you wouldn't be blown away, but people, there seems to be a need for that kind of information.
For
Mate,
sure.
when you first walk into a new environment, what's the first thing you do? Do you meet players and get some information about what they've done previously, what they think should be better? What has been your process when you've walked back into the Reds this time?
Yeah, that's a great question again. I think your first thing you got to do is listen. Everyone feel, the most important thing for you to do in a new environment is to be able to have the ability to connect with people. And the most crucial part of that, I believe, in my opinion, is your ability to listen, and understand where they're coming from. We're really blessed here because we're in a situation where a group of players have been coached by, one of the greatest rugby players of all time. What a great value set. The man, leads by example of behaviors. So we've walked in here and out, our guys know how to train. The guys get an understanding of what's right, what's wrong. I've never met a nicer bunch of boys, right? They're all men. It's been really impressive. It's been really important for me, in my role to listen, firstly. And there's been some great players that we've had here in crucial roles like Liam Wright, first and foremost, in and around that line-out space. So getting to understand the way they've done things previously. There's no point, in my belief, in me coming in and going, this is the way we're going to do it, Liam, go to the side, or Angus Blythe, go to the side around line-out D. Mate, why would I do that when I'm not playing? It's been about empowering them, utilising the information. Myself and Jonathan Fisher, who's assisting me in that space, it's been about posing different questions and different ways to do things, showing them some best case practices from around the world, what's working, what's not, and then getting them to come up with their own style that's unique for the Reds way and the way we do things, about the way we want to play.
So you're almost guiding them to get in the direction that you kind of want, but so that they feel like they have the ownership of it, or that they do have the ownership of it.
Absolutely, mate. Like, the important part around, I always find around ownership, player ownership, and players having a say in the way we play. The accountability, though, for that then still falls on me. So regardless of, even though the players might have had input into what we drive, the reality is I'm the one that needs to give them clear direction around exactly what we're doing. At some point, someone has to be accountable, and that's ultimately me for that. And if that's not successful, that will be me. However, I encourage the input, encourage them to play a part and get that buy-in around how we go about building what's going to be successful at Super Rugby level.
Is there anything that you do in particular to increase the IQ of some of the younger players, particularly around maybe the more technical aspects of forwards play? Because something I've seen, I've got quite a young group, and they're very smart, but there's some of them that probably need a hand strategically in getting their mind thinking more strategically. Is there anything that you have seen, anything that you do to increase the IQ of your guys?
Yeah, rugby IQ is always a really important one. It's a really hot topic at the moment around how you go about doing it. My belief around that area is, firstly, I'm not sure as a younger playing group if we watch enough rugby here in Australia, and that's obviously a little bit hamstrung by the fact it's only on pay TV, right, on Stan. That's no excuse. Certainly for professional players, they've got full access to that. My encouragement would be, like, the reality for a younger generation playing group, and it's very much linked to social media, is that if we just said, go and watch a game, who's got time to go and give up an hour and a half really to watch a game? Unless you genuinely love it, probably like you and I. Yeah. Being able to really pull out small snapshots and even 30-second snippets of what things that are happening in game trends that are world-class for our playing group, to try and attract and open discussions to the playing group. Not necessarily the fact that you're going that way. You might not want to go that way, but it just opens the discussion around the way with which other people are doing things. I'm a big believer in showing us doing things well. So when we look and reinforce and learning that way, so when we're bringing something new, we have to show an example of when we do it really well as a playing group, or of someone else doing it really, really well, because we want to show positive pictures of us doing it well, and just continually driving that positive feedback around, this is what gold standard is, and this is the expectation of where we get to. The rugby IP part, I believe, comes when, in our unique environment here at the moment, we've got a number of players from a few different programs that have just come in. We've got Joe Brier's come from the Crusaders. We've got, Alex Hodgman come from the Blues. And obviously, Jeffrey, JTA, who's just come in from overseas and a long time at the Hurricanes. We'd be crazy not to lean on those guys around the information they've got, as well as the current guys that are already here in the way they've looked to do things. So, it's a bit of a melting pot of ideas to start with. But the hardest part about that is you've got to ask the right questions first. Yeah. So if you just ask them to, right, what do you think here? You've got to be really pointed around what it is you actually want and be really directive around where you want it to go, or else it just becomes a discussion about nothing. You've got to be really clear and precise about driving that conversation.
When giving people positive reinforcement, particularly with this generation, is something that's very important. How do you balance that with giving them feedback on things that they can improve on?
I just give it to, you know me well. I don't mix my words, right? So that's probably a little bit later on. I'm going to hopefully talk about the fact that you've still got to be you. And if I know in my personality, I'm a really direct and honest person, but I enjoy having a discussion with a player that's really pointed and really to the point. But when you do something well, I'll continue to praise that as well, and it'll be really, really direct. But the reality is, in our environment, a professional environment, you've got to be able to understand that, and that's where the connection piece comes in. That if we give you direct feedback, you've got to be able to understand where it comes from. But then myself as a coach, I've then got to go and reinforce that learning. I can't just give direct feedback and be direct in the point in the moment.
Yeah.
And that's probably the big one that comes. And this is a bit of a point around developing that critical eye in training, so that as a coach, you've got a critical eye so that you can give immediate feedback. The point around, waiting till the end and then, getting 27 clips or, I think you've missed the moment, right? Like, you can reinforce that behavior later, but you've got to be able to pick it up in the moment. As coaches, that's probably the hardest thing that you learn. And the best way to learn that is just maybe pick a couple of points that you're going to pick up each day. If you're new to coaching, right, I'm going to look at our strength in the air as an example with jumpers. And I'm going to really be hard on all players on that today and work out what your critical eye is so that you can, even mic yourself up in that space, mic yourself up so you can hear your feedback, and just make sure that you're assessing yourself to make sure that you're getting it right, because that's so important.
Mate, where are you looking for trends in the game at the moment? Is it something that Europe's kind of leading the way? So the English Premiership, without maybe giving away any of the ideas that you guys are going to do this year, where's some good places to have a look?
Yeah, I think the World Cup's a great place to look. There's key. The reality, I don't think one hemisphere is probably leading the way other than the other. We just play differently, as in the game's just different in different hemispheres, based around the nature of, and even English Premiership as an example is just the game's played totally different at different times of the year. When the weather's good, it's a certain way. When it's not, when they're on artificial, it's played a certain way. Down here, we're lucky enough to have, even really the reality is how, to play up here in Queensland, it can be really humid and slippery in those first couple of rounds. So it essentially is a wet weather game. Where I think the trends are, World Cup was a really good, exponent of this, showed how critical, certainly at line-out time, understanding the tempo of line-outs and going in and playing quickly, the ability to have a multifaceted delivery mechanisms around that. So being able to show the same formation and have different delivery mechanisms off that. Yeah. Around maul, I feel like, and this is probably one that I know at World Rugby, they're probably looking at changing around the laws of the game. The hardest part, maul attack to defend at the moment, is when teams go short numbered lineouts and they add numbers from 10 meters once you get, because it is just this decision making for the defense around when to enter, when not to enter, do we enter? And, it's a numbers game, right? So it's this real touchy point around the laws at the moment around referees are watching defending guys' entry and the attacking guys get full entry, get full attack points at it. I know, certainly from the referees, they're talking a lot about attacking lifters blocking off and not giving access to the jumper. It's going to be something they're going to be really hot on, and they were at the World Cup as well. And I feel like that will really change the way teams have done things. the flood mentality of some teams at the World Cup. When I mean flood, I mean more of a rolling maul, back to the old school rolling maul, might come out now because you won't be able to close that seam. You might have to stay a little bit more direct and north around how you're playing and doing that.
Okay, mate, that's some pretty good information, mate. Hey, what can guys at club level do to better prepare players for Super Rugby, particularly in the Type Five? Because I played Shoot Shield for a long time. There's some outstanding Shoot Shield level players that maybe don't make a successful transition to Super Rugby, and there are some guys that do. Is there
Yeah.
something that you've seen that guys at my level can do better to prepare guys so that they can make that transition?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And first point of all would be just your own training methodology. So understanding that the speed in the game is higher, so you need to train at a higher speed. The transitions of the game are quicker, so you need to train that. The biggest thing I see with the two step ups, one from club to super and super to international, genuinely speed. Players will come into super and they'll be like, wow, that's quick. Guys going from super international come up and go, geez, that's quick. And that's another step up physically. So there's this, the biggest thing that coaches can do is be really well planned in around how they go about allowing the players to train at speed and do things repetitively well at speed. That's really, really important. The second thing from a set piece perspective in this
Yeah.
country is get them to love it. Like genuinely get them to love maul attack, maul defense, scrum attack, scrum defense, line out attack, and how critical that part of the game is. Win the ball, use the ball. Like coaching foundations from, Coaching Council, Australian Coaching Council 40 years ago have not changed.
How important is that side of set piece coaching in terms of the mindset and the attitude? Something that I've looked at, and I've got a bit of a theory because I've had a little bit of success with it, is
Yeah,
that having a positive scrummaging culture and an attitude that the scrum is important to this group, the scrum is important to our club, is to me a huge tick towards getting success.
totally.
Is that how you've seen it, or can you touch a little bit on the
Yeah,
importance of that?
totally. Couldn't agree more with you, mate. And you've been coached by me before, so you probably get my sense of my enthusiasm around the area. Um, the I think my opinion is that the intent goes hand in glove with your ability to build technically and tactically,
Yeah.
because the importance of understanding tactically about where the set piece fits, and because you can build this love for it and it can actually or sometimes go a little bit too far, and the intent, because it can be at the expense of what the team's trying to do.
Yeah.
So building the intent and the technique is important, but also understanding where it fits in the team tactically and how you want to deliver the ball. Because ultimately that's our role. We're either where our ability is to deliver the ball, or, and really put the backs in a great opportunity. And I think that's our responsibility, as coaches. We all want to watch a game where we're playing. There's more ball in play time. The ball's being used a lot more. Our ability to deliver the ball is critical. So that intent goes hand in glove with certainly with the tactical side of understanding how we want to put it together.
Could you maybe touch on a little bit of the tactical side of scrummaging at the Super Rugby level? I'm of the belief that shoot shield level, you might need some basic strategy, maybe a little bit more when you get all the Super Rugby guys come back at the back end of the year. But just so younger coaches can have an understanding, what are some of the basic strategies that you might see at a Super Rugby or a Test level at scrum time?
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because my philosophy has actually always been the same. So having coached in all of them, I actually haven't changed. I've developed it and honed it, worked with a number of different coaches that have really had a huge input into that, and watched a few guys. Ultimately, though, it's really three things, right? So for me, it's about balance, speed, and power, right? So if we can, and then your ability, so balance firstly is balance on the bind. So pre-bind, on the bind, and balance post set,
Yeah.
your ability to be quick to win, so win the bind. So who's up first? Your ability to be quicker across the line of engage, and then your ability to react quicker than the opposition on the call, and then the power. So my big thing is around time under tension, and you know that well, and that's a Mark Del Mazzo terminology, a famous French scrum coach who was in Japan.
Yeah.
Time under tension. So it's about our ability to generate power as an individual and collective as an 8, and do that longer than the opposition. So the ability to earn the right, our ability to earn the right from 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock collectively, by our ability to have and be stable in that process. So it's terminology I would talk about: earn the right, your ability, if you don't earn the right to go from 12 to 1 from your hips, then you don't actually move your feet. The ability to have all feet, 16 sets of feet in ground, and power going, and you're going down through the ground rather than going backwards, is critical. We spent and have spent over the last 5 weeks as much time on our time under tension and scrum strength activities, I guess, as we have building our scrum.
And you would do that from test rugby all the way through to club or schoolboy level. Never changes.
Never changes. The same amount of time we would emphasize on that on grass would be identical, because the importance of your ability to generate power as an individual, and then as an 8 and as a collective, both through grips and bind. And, there's, a lot of other things around breathing, which is what the Italians do, that well.
Yeah.
Exhales on exertion, that's important. Breathing through your time under tension that are critical. But honestly, I think at times we can make it more complex than it actually is.
Definitely.
The simpler, the better. How we can collectively as an 8 go forward is really, really important for us to understand.
Mate, that's awesome. I feel like I could chew your ear off for hours, mate. I've just got a couple of rapid fire questions, and I'll let you get back to the day job. Mate, what are some common mistakes you see from young forwards coaches?
Yeah, I think the big thing is they're not themselves. I think as soon as you understand that you as a coach have to don't try and be someone you're not. So be yourself. You're in that role for a reason. Let it come out. Let the players get an understanding of who you are, and they will be an extension of who you are. And that's really, really important.
Mate, that's fantastic. Do you have any books that you'd recommend? Do you read much? Audio books, podcasts, anything that you'd throw out to the audience?
This might be a bit crazy, mate, but I'm a massive fan of Dave Goggins. So, Can't Hurt Me, his book, and it was an audio book as well. Men in the Boat, which is a movie just come out, which is a great book, as well. Talks about the Olympic team. I'm a big audio book guy. I'm not an avid reader, but I love audiobooks, and anyone I can, really push to, that's really important to be able to continue to learn and get different ideas.
Mate, I'd recommend the one he just did with Andrew Huberman. He just did a really good podcast with him. If you haven't listened to it, it's, I went for a walk the other day, started listening to him, like, fuck, I better start running.
Brilliant. Mate, how good.
Mate,
yeah, sorry, go.
No, I was going to say, do you have any documentaries or anything else that you'd recommend?
Yeah, so documentaries, not so much, mate. I'm not a huge, don't have that much time around documentaries, but obviously the only ones I would is very much, and this is very corny of me, right? But it's the hard knock style, like the watching coaches in action. So watching the intricate in action conversations that coaches are happening, not the fanfare that goes around it. Understand the nuances of how they talk, and how it's like you and I are talking now, right? It's just like, you don't have to overthink the way we communicate with people. Just have normal conversations. Be normal.
Yeah. It's be normal. This is the best advice there is for a very unnormal occupation, just quietly.
Oh, very true. Very true. We are all nuts, mate.
Well, look, I was saying to a mate of mine, because I've got the level 4 camp this weekend, and they go, what's the best part of the level 4 camp? And I've gone, well, to be honest, it's meeting other people who are as crazy as you.
100%. All the time, mate. And not apologizing for not being normal, right?
Absolutely. Hey, mate, I forgot to ask you this question, but I'll throw it in now.
Yes.
Big theme of what we try and do on the podcast is give people a healthy view on failure. It's something that I've recently changed, particularly from coaching and doing this podcast. What's your relationship with failure? And do you have any failures that you wouldn't mind sharing that help set you up for later success or that you learn from?
Yeah, great. Yeah, it's a really good question. The simple answer for me is love it and embrace it. First and foremost, because it's a critical part of your learning. If you're not failing, you're not learning. So that in return, both in your own career and where you're at as individual is important, but two, even within your own team. So if training looks really pretty and you're executing everything, I can guarantee you it's not going to look like that in the game. If it's got to look ugly, right? You got to enjoy the chaos, enjoy your ability to be able to get out that as a coach. Now, in your career, for me, certainly had some, number of failures, right? So, and I'll come back to probably my first stint in Japan, and a failure not in my own right as such, but we were at a team in top league, at a team I've just left actually because I've done 2 stints at Cuden Voltex,
Yeah.
and it was a period where, so I was 27, a head coach at 27, and we had 12 foreign players, and I got called into the office at the company, and they basically said, look, we're behind budget, the tsunami's hit, we're gonna get rid of the program. The program's gone. So you've got till the end of the season, and then you've got nowhere to go. The thing around that for me was around understanding that, and not necessarily just failure, but we're a team that had the year before we'd won promotion, gone up, and were really successful up there. So we were flying high. We're thinking, right, budgets are going to the next level. We had, Chris Latham's, Chris Jack, Tim Atkinson, even Grazy was playing back then. He just left us. At that stage, we're thinking, right, we're flying. The reality is that at any given time in your career, it can be totally pulled out from underneath you. It can be gone. It's happened twice in my career now. Melbourne was the same. So at the Rebels, it was gone, flying high in super, and then bang, the team gets sold for $1, and we're, to Rugby Australia, and where Western Force coaches come in, and we're gone. I'm on a plane to England. So the biggest thing for me around failure is actually the flip side, and enjoying every moment and being present in every moment, every day. Enjoy the process, because at any given time it could be gone.
Mate, that's amazing advice. It's something that I don't think is talked about enough, particularly not just coaching, but professional sport in general, is the uncertainty behind your career. As you said, like just look at the Australian situation from earlier this year. All of a sudden, the entire Wallaby coaching staff's gone, and there's a new one in. So, mate, I love that. I'm going to take that. I'm going to take that on board for sure. Last question, sir. What
Yes.
advice would you give 18-year-old Zane Hilton?
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. I think about this all the time, actually. I think to myself, do it all again would definitely be one. So there'd be one piece. Just do what, I went into coaching early, so I was lucky. The biggest one, though, would be listen more. Certainly listen more early on. There's no doubt in my career early on, I thought that I had to have all the answers. And until I realized I didn't have all the answers, and I started listening more to my players and other peers around me and becoming a lifelong learner, I wasn't going anywhere.
How long did that take you?
I would say maybe 5 to 10, probably 7 to 10 years. Yeah.
That's such great advice, mate. Thank you so much for your time. I'm very happy for you. Say hello
mate.
to Dale Robertson for me.
I will.
If you haven't had a beer with him yet, be very careful when you do. He's a dangerous human being. But mate, thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure.
You're welcome, mate. Thank you. And thanks for having us on, Hayne. Good luck with your season.